Hi, this is Ricky Spencer, and welcome to another of our Sociology of Media Voices series. Today, we have an interesting and a very thought-provoking conversation with Professor Judd about the voice to Parliament. So we're going to spend a bit of time unpacking some of the issues to be considered, and some of these issues we hope will clarify for some of you who may want to know a little bit more, to have a bit of a deeper understanding. And we hope this material will be of use to you, especially in your schools, as well as you and your colleagues to have an informed decision. So Professor Judd is Pro Vice-Chancellor of Indigenous and Director of Indigenous Studies program at the School of Culture and Communications at the University of Melbourne. In his role as PVC, Professor Judd has responsibility for institutional policy, strategy and advice in relation to all aspects of Indigenous higher education. Professor Judd has held the position of Director of Indigenous Studies since 2020 and was appointed Pro Vice-Chancellor in 2022. This incredible person holds a number of qualifications and has a vast experience in the area of public policy. And he holds a PhD in Australian Indigenous Studies, as well as postgraduate qualifications in higher education, teaching and learning. And his area of research expertise relates to Australian race relations in Australian sports and interdisciplinary research methods in Indigenous studies and in Australian history. He has over 30 years experience in both professional and academic roles, and he's also held several current Australian Research Council research grants. Thank you and welcome, Professor, to joining us today.
Thank you, Ricky. Pleasure to be in one of your sociology interview situations again.
Yes.
I remember well the last time we met.
And I think so many things have happened since then. And for us, it's sort of at a critical time and, a shifting of time. So let's begin. So what is the voice and how will it work? So let's start unpacking that.
So on one level, I think the voice is a very simple proposition. And the proposition around the voice is that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples be enabled to put their points of view and their understandings of issues that impact them to the Australian government. The request for a voice in that sense is a request for an advisory committee to be established made up of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander representatives from across Australia. It's as simple as that.
Can you maybe tell us, for those that may not be aware, what does an advisory committee hold and what power does an advisory committee have?
That's an interesting question, and I should let your listeners know that I'm not a lawyer and I'm certainly not a constitutional lawyer. My academic background and expertise is in Indigenous studies and public policy. My understanding of advice and how that operates in the context of the Australian Constitution is that advice in itself is a very powerful mechanism. For those of you old enough to remember, in 1975, the Governor-General of Australia used his advice to essentially dismiss an elected government. So in that sense, it's powerful. On the other hand, advice can either be accepted or rejected. And I think, it will be the case that as the voice or if the voice becomes operational, that there will be governments who accept some advice and reject other pieces of advice coming forward from this advisory group. So on that basis, I think a lot of the discussion around the voice as something that's going to end Australian democracy as we know it is just nonsense. The voice proposition is very tame if we compare this development to things overseas where Indigenous people participate in national governments. So, Canada, they have a Bill of Rights. Indigenous cultural identities and cultural practices are protected under that Bill of Rights. Canada still exists and operates. In the United States, Canada and New Zealand, they have treaty mechanisms. Those countries still exist and function. New Zealand has, under its treaty arrangements, dedicated seats for Indigenous people in its national parliament. The country still functions quite well. So, all the naysayers who think this is going to be the end of the world or Australia as we know it, I don't think anybody really has anything to worry about.
Thank you for that, because I think that's something that a lot of people, or there's some sort of misinformation or that comes out that people have this fear, like, what does this mean? And coming from that, and neither of us are lawyers, but we get this idea about what will change in the Constitution. Will it change the Constitution, having a voice?
Yes, it will. The Constitution that was written and adopted in 1901, as we all know, or most of us know, was unfortunately in that form a racist document, in that it denied the existence of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and included various sections that were racist against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and others. So the provision of a voice in the Constitution is really important in terms of providing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, the first peoples of Australia, with constitutional recognition. But secondly, and more practically, I guess, in terms of future policy agendas for Australian government, the voice will be enshrined in the Constitution. So this is not a mechanism that can be taken away very easily. If the referendum this year gets up and the Australian people decide to support the voice, in order to take it away, there will need to be another referendum putting that question back to the people. So I think it's really important. It's both symbolic and practical, if you like. And the practical benefits of a voice will be that even hostile governments will need to listen to and take into consideration the advice of First Nations people. They can reject it, but the formal process is enshrined in the Constitution. So they will, even if they reject the advice at certain times or on certain issues, that will be in the national record of Australia that they didn't listen. And I think that's a really important step forward. The other, I guess, way I always think about this is most reasonable governments these days and most reasonable Australian institutions, whether they be universities or big corporate mining companies, if they're designing policies and strategies that are particular to women or gender diverse people or people from refugee backgrounds or people with disabilities or whoever it is, it's normal practice that people with lived experience are part of a consultative process to develop a position. The Voice just does that at national level for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So I think it's really important, and people do get caught up in the detail of what the Voice will involve. But you know, I recently heard Senator Pat Dodson speak about the Voice at a forum held up at Federation University in Ballarat. And the way he put it, I think, is really compelling. He said that the referendum on Voice is really about including recognition for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the Constitution, creating this mechanism which will be constitutionally enshrined, and giving the document honour that it has lacked since 1901. So, you know, this is an opportunity for our generation, Australians who are now living, to really bring honour to a document that it has not had on us for a very long time.
And I'm just thinking, as you're saying those words, I mean, you've obviously been someone heavily involved in looking deeply in Indigenous studies over the years. Do you see that this will be a critical moment now that you're living through this, that this will add, obviously it's going to add to our scholarship, you know, in this space. How do you feel that this will change? You know, and I guess either way, the fact that we're having a referendum now in 2023, do you see that this is going to change the direction to how we have race relations in Australia moving forward?
Yeah, thanks. That's a really good question, Ricky. I think if the referendum is successful and the Yes campaign gets up, it will really change the way that Australia and Australians view Indigenous people. And I think this process is already happening now anyway, where people are increasingly dialoguing with Indigenous people and referencing Indigenous country and language terms and acknowledgements to country and welcome to country, and smoking ceremonies and the like are becoming normalised. But I think if the yes vote is successful, in a way, those references to Indigenous people and Indigenous cultural traditions become part of the national culture and identity in ways that we probably see in New Zealand and other places, but not so much here. If the answer is no, I think that places Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in a very difficult position, because it's not a return to the status quo, but it sends us to a place where our voices and our identities don't matter. And that's quite a horrifying thought, actually, to think that that's a possibility. And I hope that doesn't happen. I think the significance of this referendum is probably similar to the 1967 referendum on citizenship. And I see it as I said previously, as an opportunity for all living Australians who will have a vote in 2023 to make a difference that will potentially, almost certainly, change the direction and the character of the country going forward. And my view is that this is a moment where those of us lucky enough to have long lives and lots of grandchildren in the future, we'll be able to sit down with them towards the end of our days and say, you know, I helped do this, and this place is a better place because of it. I don't even want to think about what happens if we all collectively vote no. I think life for First Nations people then becomes much more difficult. And I have heard the old warriors, people of the vintage of Noel Pearson and Marcia Langton and Jackie Huggins, you know, say that their life work then becomes meaningless. They tried and failed. So, you know, I really hope for their sake, as much as future generations, that this gets up.
And as we're kind of coming towards the end of this important conversation with you, I want to just get your thoughts and consider, for perhaps the young people listening to this, young students, what message would you like to give to them, and especially those of First Nations background? Why is the referendum that will take place this year important for them?
I guess it's really important because, and it's simple really, do you want to live in a country that has an honourable and non-racist constitution as one of its key and foundational documents? The future is theirs, and if I was them, I would want to live in such a society, not the one that I and the society that you also grew up in, which has been characterised by racism, exclusions, marginalisations, and all of those things which exist to some extent because the Constitution and the formal structures of government allow it to be so. The voice is the first step in changing that, and we know from the Uluru Statement from the Heart that it's just one part of a three-part ask that the Indigenous delegates on our behalf graciously asked the Australian people to consider. So voice, treaty and truth-telling are the things that constitute this agenda for a better Australia.
And as we wrap up this really important broadcast today, for people listening, could you, in your wisdom, recommend resources to people if they want to get an informed positionality for themselves of where they sit in the voice? Are there any resources or websites or searches that you would recommend to our community of academics and students and people who are really passionate about these issues to explore?
Yes, I know of one website that's really good. Yes 23 is one of the campaigns that is supporting the yes vote, and even if you're not quite sure at the moment which way you're going to vote, there are some fact sheets that are downloadable on that website. I believe that Reconciliation Australia has also updated their website and is providing materials. For those of you out there in the Melbourne area, the University of Melbourne, from now through to the referendum day, will be running a number of public events. Some of those events through the Melbourne Law School, where we'll have constitutional lawyers who know about these things from a legal perspective, providing people with the truth of the matter. So I think it's really important. whatever your opinion is of the voice at the moment, that you take the time to inform yourself with evidence-based facts about this process. And, you know, please do not be swayed by mistruths and misinformation that might be floating around on Facebook and Twitter and other social media sites.
Professor Judd, it's been an absolute pleasure in having you spend some time with us, and thank you so much for giving your positionality on the voice and helping those of us in the community working out the issues to what to be considered. Thank you for spending some time with us today.
Thank you. Pleasure, and thanks for the opportunity.